Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And we are in the early stages of the 2028 to 2029 offseason. I think I've simmed less than a week since the last episode, 6 or 7 game days, I believe. And I have probably spent about an hour of real time for every game day that I have simmed forward. I'm not saying that with any amount of pride. The fact that I'm a grown man and I've invested so much time in a couple days of a pretend baseball game is actually quite frightening. But I do enjoy playing the game, and I also enjoy the interaction with the viewers, particularly in this series. So sincerely appreciate the engagement, and hopefully we will ultimately reward our loyal viewers with some better play than what we've put up through our first 5 years here in Oakland, where we've won between 72 and 80 games in each of our 5 seasons. So we haven't been horrible, but we certainly have not been good, and we've never even technically been average. And although we've only moved forward several days in game time, it has been very eventful. We are going to really start changing this team to try to kickstart things as far as our success at the major league level without completely ruining the farm system that we have been trying to build here for almost 5 years at this point. Start off with several housekeeping items just to let you know what we have been working on. Mentioned at the end of our last episode that we had a number of spots to fill in our system. Right now we're only looking for a manager in the DSL and a bench coach at the major league level. We have a new manager this year, Kip Wells, who has been our AAA manager for the last 4 years. He won the Manager of the Year award every season. You can see we've had a very strong run with him. More importantly than his success on the field, though, he's outstanding with development, excellent with mechanics, excellent with aging, and we expect him to have good relationships with our Oakland athletics team. And he also had a personality that worked well with the coaching staff that we had in place. So did a little bit of gamesmanship. We signed him to a 5-year extension in AAA. He was also requesting a promotion, so he wanted to go to the majors. So he's still signed with us for that 5-year extension. And then we promoted him to the majors. Hey, we're the Oakland A's. We got to save every penny that we can. So number of other changes as well. Jacob Doris on board as our first base coach. I mentioned we're still trying to track down a bench coach, and a few additional changes across the organization to hopefully boost the development of this farm system that we have been patiently trying to build, as I mentioned, for almost 5 years now. We will get into a lot more detail on what we've been doing. We have completed several trades, and we have one potential blockbuster brewing. And as those of you know who have played this game, particularly on the most difficult trade settings, it can be a tortuous process to put trades together. But we found stuff that we're at least willing to live with, and as I noted earlier, we've got to change things up with this team. We've got to bring in some offense. We've got to shake things up and do something differently, because the definition of insanity is to do the same thing and expect different results, and I feel to an extent that that's what we've been doing with this team over these last couple of seasons, and time for a change. So we had team options. The two most significant ones, actually I think they may have been the only two ones, were a $7.5 million option on Clark Schmidt, who has been a very good starting pitcher for us through this playthrough, but has started to lose a fair amount of velocity and a fair amount of stuff. And then Kettle Marte, who we signed last year to a 3-year deal, but the last 2 years were options. Had a $5 million option on him this year. And with both Schmidt and Marte, we ended up declining those options. That freed up a good amount of money for us to ultimately use in bringing on players through trade or free agency. We tried trading both of those players. Not surprisingly, there was limited to no demand for both of them. I think for Schmidt, we couldn't get anything in return at $7.5 million option next year. And Marte, we could get back 2 or 3 of the worst contracts in baseball in return. So we just decided to move on from both of them. Schmidt particularly, thank him for his significant contributions to Oakland over the last 5 years. Marte was not as impactful as we would have hoped in his 1 year in Oakland in 2028. We've also fired up the development lab for the 2028 to 2029 offseason, and we're being a lot more aggressive. 6 of our 8 slots are going to be with minor league talent. Duncan Marston, we're still investing in the former 4th overall pick, trying to improve his control. Bertrand, the Dominator, Albrighton, failed in a strength and conditioning program a year ago. We're putting him through one again. Working on plate discipline with Juan Rodas, quality of contact with David Ramirez, improving control with last year's number 2 overall pick Jaheim Pennyman, and Roussel Shepard working on plate discipline. Also have 2 MLB players going through programs, younger guys who we have signed to long-term contracts, trying to invest in those kind of players. Tyler Soderstrom, the 26-year-old, working on his plate discipline, and Drake Baldwin, the 27-year-old catcher, working on quality of contact. Very early stages. Obviously, we must be at least 5 days in because we now have progress rather than the kind of evaluation countdown going on. So maybe we played a day or 2 more than I had estimated, but we still are on September or November 12th, the very early stages of what will likely be a significant offseason for the history of these Oakland A's. And you may remember from recent episodes that when we were planning out this offseason, we noted that it looked like Spencer Torkelson might be a player that we could go after, and that was part of the reason that we declined those contracts with Schmidt and Marte. Not the hugest reason, but certainly freeing up some money to potentially chase after a big-time free agent was definitely on our radar. Torkelson with a 119 WRC plus, and he has been a 130 or higher WRC plus for 4 straight years now. 29-year-old, looks to be in the prime of his career and certainly has a hitting profile that would be a great asset to our team, and he would certainly be the best player that we could bring on board. Unfortunately, a couple of things have happened. It does look like he's still headed to free agency, but I don't remember that his injury proneness was fragile when we looked at him a couple of months ago, or maybe it was only a few weeks ago game time. It's possible that it was, and he's still been very effective recently, although it looks like he did have that oblique strain as of September 1st, so I think it's possible he moved from normal to fragile within the last few months. I think I could still get over that and roll the dice on him, but unfortunately, when we last checked in with Mr. Torkelson, I believe he was looking for $12 or $13 million. That was his expected demand, and thought for that type of bat, a guy who's still in his 20s, it seemed like the perfect scenario for a team like our Oakland A's that didn't have a ton of money to spend and needed to add an impact player. But you can see now that we're getting closer to him heading onto the open market, he's looking for between $25 and $26 million a year, which is probably closer to fair value for what he is. I don't know why it was so cheap before, But ultimately, that meant and means to me that I don't think the pursuit of Spencer Torkelson is realistic this offseason. And unfortunately, that's meant that I've had to pivot. I don't see any real significant free agent that we're going to be able to afford. So we have instead had to invest a significant amount of time investigating the trade market to see what, if anything, we can do to bring some more offense to these Oakland A's. So, given our grudging acceptance that the free agent market this year was not likely to deliver the big time bat that we would need, we started doing player searches, and we were pretty simply just looking for someone with above average contact power and eye to help boost our offense. Not surprisingly, some of the most famous and most successful players in all of baseball showing up on that list. And many of them are making massive amounts of money. And there was just really no one realistic for us to go at on this list. So we got a little more conservative and focused more on players with excellent contact, as well as average power and an average eye. And there were a few more options on this list when we were a little less discerning as far as the home run power in the eye, but ultimately still found ourselves in a situation where the players that we were looking for were just going to be way too incredibly expensive, at least the top end players. One example here, Walker Jenkins, the 23-year-old right fielder in the Miami organization. Unlike a lot of these guys, he's not making a lot of money. Clearly, it's going to take a lot to get him in a trade, coming off of a year where he hit 317, 25 homers, 86 ribbies, 113 WRC plus, an excellent defensive outfielder with an excellent bat. We knew the cost to bring him on board would be high, but we didn't necessarily appreciate how high it would be, even if we offered Bertrand Albrighton and Arturo Estrada and Alejandro Landin, the three top prospects in our organization that we can trade. There's not even another player that we can add to that deal to get it done. So the price for the likes of Walker Jenkins and the true impact players was just prohibitive in terms of the prospects and players that it would take us to get them in trade, and also just in many cases in terms of the salary that we'd have to bring back on board. Just not realistic for us to be playing at the top end of the trade market, unfortunately. So we did make several arbitration offers before we got wrapped up in the trades. And Mike Vassell, who you may remember we picked up in a trade with the Mets. We signed him to his arbitration extension. And the fan reaction was amazing, and overall fan interest increased when we brought him on board. Unfortunately, that was a bit of a lie, as our fan interest remained at a 37, which is where it was when the offseason began. So we have subsequently made other moves that you can see here that have actually pulled our fan interest down to a 36. But I don't know. You may remember that a year ago we dipped to this minimal fan loyalty, and I don't know if when you're down at that fan loyalty level, it just becomes impossible-ish to improve your fan interest. If that is the case, this is going to be an even more difficult treadmill for us to get off of than it already is. Hopefully that's not the case, and if we sign truly impactful players, we can get that significant boost to fan interest, because we're going to need to do something to get the finances of this organization moving better. So it was very disappointing when Mr. Vassell signed with us, and the fans were allegedly excited, and still fan interest didn't move at all. We also did sign Emmett Sheehan and Jesus Soto. So 3 pitchers who were arbitration eligible, we will be bringing back next season. So I was looking at trades right from the start of this period, I think back on the 5th of November. We also wanted to get updated scouting reports on some of the lower tier players that we did find when we were doing those player searches. So by a couple days ago, we did get those scouting reports back, so we felt like we kind of knew exactly what we might be getting in terms of some of the trades that we were considering, and that got us moving. And first trade, we traded away Darrell Hernandez. You may remember he was set to make about $4 million this year. Felt like we could afford to get rid of an infielder, and Hernandez making over $4 million. Realistically, he's been a 80-ish WRC plus player throughout his Oakland career. Did have that one better year a couple seasons ago with a 91, but he's been 82 and 81 the last couple of seasons. Nice defensive player, very versatile, but he hasn't shown that he is a plus offensive player. Half a WAR last year, 1.7 WAR this year, missing playing time in both years due to injury. And he actually did have a decent amount of value, which you can understand. He's a good contact hitter. He's a very good and versatile fielder, and he's still not incredibly expensive. But given that I like a lot of the options that we have in the infield, and if everyone is healthy, we're going to have Soderstrom at first, Rincon at second, Endo at third, and Mr. Cawley at short. Felt like Hernandez as a $4 million super utility guy was a luxury we didn't need. To get this trade done, we also had to include the reliever Jordan Romano, who we picked up in that trade with the Guardians. The Guardians were retaining his contract, so he was a very cost-effective and experienced major reliever for us. So didn't love giving him up. He stunk in the half season that he was with us in Oakland this year, but still felt like he could be a very prominent player in our bullpen next year. Unfortunately, the guys who would get this deal done, he was the most realistic. But what we did get in return was a corner outfielder and corner outfielder / first baseman who we think both can be decent major league hitters. You may remember Chase DeLauter. We were talking about him in a trade for Mason Miller 3 seasons ago, it feels like. DeLauter is 27 years old now. He's now arbitration eligible, making less than Hernandez, though, so he fits well on the team. Good contact, good gap power, average eye. Even with the good gap power, one of our reservations about him a couple years ago was the lack of speed, and he doesn't generate a ton of extra base hits. He has not been a big-time offensive player, a 97 WRC plus for his career. He's been slightly above average offensively the last 2 years. Had a career-high 11 homers and 59 ribbies this year. Our thought is that we'll play him against right-handers only, hopefully. And although he's got a 97 career WRC plus, against righties it's 110. So certainly not a great power hitter. As I mentioned, coming off a career high with 11 homers, kind of a 260, 270 kind of hitter over the course of his major league career. Actually, no, that's against right-handers. Yeah, 266, so exactly, almost a 260, 270 kind of hitter. But feel he's at least a legitimate-ish major league bat that can help us a little bit. The other guy that we picked up is more volatile, but potentially even more intriguing, and that's Charlie Condon. He's fragile physically, which we don't like. He's not a real good infielder or a real good outfielder defensively. And you look at his batting ratings, 55 contact, potential to get to 55 gap power, 50 power, and 50 eye. Not particularly exciting, but he is a right-handed hitter who oddly seems to be significantly more effective against right-handed pitching. So he can be a guy who's potentially in the lineup 120 days a year. And I mentioned the volatility and the upside with him. He's coming off of a brutal season with a 67 WRC plus. But the year before, he had a 124 WRC plus in his first full year in the majors with 32 homers and 105 ribbies. What he really is probably somewhere between both of these numbers. You can see for his career, he's got a 96 WRC plus. But similarly to DeLauder, 110 against right-handed pitching. So I don't think either Condon or DeLauder are big-time players. Certainly if Condon goes out and hits 30 homers and 100 ribbies, that's a huge season in the context of what we've had in Oakland. But kind of feel like they are both decent offensive players. Again, I would have loved to be able to be chasing after Spencer Torkelson. I would have loved to be able to pick up a young star like a Walker Jenkins or a Riley Green, but the demands in trade for players like that were just too extreme. So my thought is we'll at least get a couple guys on board who I think can be productive and respectable major league hitters, and that's something that we have not had a lot of in this playthrough thus far. But we weren't done with just one trade. We ended up making a deal with the Cardinals as well, and we sent away Will Banfield. He had been our backup catcher for the last few seasons. We ended up signing him to a contract that, for a backup catcher with his great defensive skill, would not have been a horrible contract if he had actually shown any ability to hit. Unfortunately, over parts of 4 seasons in Oakland, he had put up a 42 WRC plus and was below replacement level, even given his outstanding defense. So we felt like heading into a year when he was going to be making over $2 million and then $2.5 million the year after that, that was a lot to be spending on a backup catcher who just could not hit. And we also decided to move off of Eddys Leonard, who was headed to arbitration due to make about $1.5 million, similar to Banfield. He had a brutal year last year, hitting just $150. But even with the departure of Leonard and Hernandez, still feel that with guys like Max Muncy in the mix, we've got enough infielders for next season, and Leonard helped us get this deal done. And then we also had to include the veteran pitcher Joey Cantillo, who was part of our minor league organization. No big loss to give him up. In return, we got Agustin Ramirez, who is another right-handed hitting catcher like Banfield. A little bit younger. He's not as good defensively, but we think he is slightly better offensively. Over the course of his career, he's put up a 61 WRC plus, so he certainly has not been exceptional. But against left-handed pitching, he has been a league average offensive player over the course of his career. And with the fact that we still have Mr. Baldwin on board as our starting catcher, who will be playing against right-handed pitching for us, felt like Ramirez against left-handed pitching would at least hopefully give us some respectable, close to major league quality offense in the 35 or 40 games we expect him to start each season against left-handed pitching. He's not as good defensively as Banfield was, but he's still certainly fine. And he's also making the major league minimum still this year. So we opened up a little more cash by getting Banfield off the books and bringing Ramirez on board. So we hopefully get more offense against left-handed pitchers from the catcher position. And hopefully we didn't hurt our defense too much. And we also save a little bit of money in that trade. So the hope is that bringing Ramirez on board along with Condon and DeLauder give us above league average production against right-handed pitching, and Ramirez gives us somewhere around league average production against left-handed pitching while also playing solid defense. So feel like the offense in theory is a little better now than it was a week ago. And there is one other deal that we have already completed, and this is the most significant of the deals, although it hopefully will help our pitching staff for years to come rather than our offense. And granted, our pitching didn't need a ton of help. Had been very good last year, but we felt like this deal, although we had to give up a lot of important resources, still made sense. You may remember that we just signed Mike Vassell to that arbitration deal, and we didn't get a bump in fan interest, even though it said the fans were excited. We did get a 1-point bump when we picked up Mr. Condon in the trade with Cleveland, so that moved our fan interest up to 38. Unfortunately, when we traded Vassell away, we lost 2 points of fan interest. So although the fans were excited when he came on board, we didn't see any improvement. But when we traded him away a couple days later, we did get a -2. So that's how we ended up with the 36 fan interest. It is a broken rubric at this point to me, and given how important it is to the game, it's a bit frustrating. But regardless, I am still happy about this trade. We had to give up a few minor leaguers, pitcher Bradley Hodges, pitcher Caden Aoki, and then more significantly, 19-year-old reliever Dave Weston. Potentially really good stuff, a nice 2-pitch arsenal. He didn't do much in rookie ball in his debut this year, but Weston was a former 13th round pick of ours in 2027 who looks like he might be able to be a useful player. And then we also had to give up the outfielder Andy Scott. He is a guy who we picked in the 5th round of the 2027 draft. Felt like he was really good value there. He was respectable this year in rookie ball, his first year in professional baseball, and think he could be a pretty solid right fielder with a more than respectable bat if he fully develops. No guarantees that he will, but trading away Vassell, who is a pretty solid major league pitcher, along with the 2 real prospects, as well as Aoki and Hodges, who are more just guys who could potentially be in the back of a bullpen at some point. We were able to get Jackson Ferris from the San Francisco Giants. His control is not as good as Vassell. His movement is the same, but we think his stuff is better. He's also younger. He's got a potential 4-pitch arsenal, and he's a lefty rather than a righty. And given the difficulty that right-handed batters have in Oakland, felt like in a perfect scenario we wanted to add a lefty into our rotation this offseason. And it was kind of addition by subtraction to bring Ferris on board. He hasn't been exceptional in his major league career, slightly below average in terms of his ERA plus, a bit above average in terms of his FIP minus over the course of his career, but he's put up almost a 3 WAR in each of his 2 seasons in the major leagues. still making the major league minimum this upcoming season. Concern with Mr. Ferris is that his salaries are going to start going up really quickly. I think there's value in him, but next year expected to make about 4 million, and then it'll be about 8 million, 12 million, and 15 million the years after that. So he's not cheap, but I think he is arguably the best pitcher that we have right now. He's only 24 years old, and although, Vassell, as I said, is similar. Better control, not as good stuff. Also did in Vassell actually throws, I think, a mile an hour harder than Mr. Ferris does, but I thought getting rid of the poor leadership of Vassell in the clubhouse also might have helped a little bit. And we got younger in the deal and arguably better in the deal. So Weston, the reliever, and Scott, the outfielder, young guys who may become useful major leaguers down the line. We know that Vassell is useful already, but still felt like we ultimately got, by a small margin, the best player back in the deal, and we also got 4 years younger in the starting rotation. As I noted, I don't know how long we're going to be able to afford to have Jackson Ferris, but I think having Ferris pitching for us this year rather than Vassell does improve our pitching staff and our starting rotation a bit, which hopefully over the course of the season maybe means an extra win or two for us. So as I noted, it is a bit depressing that after these moves, our fan interest has actually declined these first 7 or so days of the offseason. But we do have one more deal brewing, and this one would be a monster if we can get it done. A goal for us between now and 2031 is to acquire an all-star. And a goal for us is to improve our fan interest. I'm a little worried with the fact that our fan interest generally hasn't been moving up when we've done things that should improve the fan interest, that if we do this deal, we're still not going to get much of a boost. And given the amount that we're going to need to give up to bring this player on board, that would be a bit of a bummer if we didn't get a fan interest improvement. But if we can pull this trade off, it would bring a very good bat onto our team, a much better bat than either DeLauder or Condon, and certainly a better bat than Ramirez. It would be a difference-making bat for our infield if we can do this. It is a large deal in terms of the numbers of players we're giving up. There's really 4 or 5 core players that we're giving up that really have significant value to the other team. And then the other guys that we included were, I think, another 4 kind of 4A kind of veterans from our organization or minor leaguers with good personalities, and each of them just got them to retain basically an extra 5% of the contract. Unfortunately, the deal that I've proposed to them, we're still going to be on the hook for 65% of this player's contract. So similar to what we just experienced with Mr. Ferris, we may or may not really be engaged with this guy for the long term. But as I said, we've got to do something different this offseason. We've got to do something to boost the offense. And this, to me, is a potential way to do it. So we'll continue simming forward and hopefully hear back from the Detroit Tigers shortly. And we made it to Gold Glove Day, the start of awards season, and we do have an award in Oakland this year. Drake Baldwin, our starting catcher, wins the first Gold Glove of his career. Makes us feel a little bit better, potentially moving on from Banfield, his running mate in the catcher's room. Still hoping for more offense than Baldwin going forward. He did get up to a 98 WRC plus this year, so I guess I shouldn't be too harsh on him, but 2.7 WAR and the first Gold Glove of his career for our starting catcher who plays every day for us against right-handed pitchers. And we have heard back from the Detroit Tigers, and we are close to a potential deal to bring Colt Keith on board. Mentioned we've got an owner goal to acquire an all-star. Check on that front. We've got an owner goal to improve our fan interest. Mr. Keith is extremely popular. Hopefully, check on that front, improving fan interest. And most importantly, Mr. Keith is a very good offensive player who has put up a 125 WRC plus over the course of his career. I actually mentioned in the tutorial video I did a couple of months ago about potentially good and potentially bad contracts in OOTP 25. I noted that I thought that the long-term contract that the Tigers had signed Colt Keith to could become one of the better contracts in baseball. And it seems that at least in this world it has. This is a guy who over the course of 5 basically full years in the majors at this point has averaged almost 30 homers and over 100 ribbies a year. He would, the day he comes to us, become our best offensive player. He is an excellent defensive first baseman. Unfortunately, we already have Tyler Soderstrom in that role, so we might need to end up using Mr. Keith at second or third base, where he is adequate at best. That being said, the potential to bring a bat like this on board is something that we have to think real strongly about. I mentioned that I really liked his contract at the start of this playthrough, and it still is a very good contract for just about any team. He'll be making $5 million this upcoming year, and then 10, 13, and 15 the last 3 years of this now 4-year deal. But those numbers after this year with the $5 million start getting a bit scary for a team whose payroll has typically been about $60 million a year. So as I mentioned, we included some veterans in the deal to get to the point where the Tigers would be retaining 35% of the contract in this prospective deal. You know, that being said, we're still going to be on the hook the season after next for $6.5 million and about $10 million by the end of this deal. It's a very tradable contract, particularly with the Tigers retaining 35% of it. If we do bring him on board, he would clearly be our best offensive player. He's in the prime of his career right now, and the hope would be that having him, DeLauder, Condon, Ramirez on board, we can finally jumpstart this offense, even though we're going to be likely losing a bit defensively by bringing Mr. Keith on board. And if we do make this trade, we will be taking a step back defensively, and the position we'll be taking a step back defensively at is third base, because the controversial Hidero Endo is one of the key pieces that we need to send to the Tigers to make this trade happen. And Endo, despite his flaws as a hitter, is certainly a better defensive third baseman than Colt Keith at this point. So we would be giving up a bit offensively or defensively. We'd be giving up a bit in terms of power, as Mr. Endo actually hit more home runs than Colt Keith this past year, but Colt Keith is a much more well-rounded offensive and overall player. You can see he's put up 3.5, 3.3, and 4.4 WARs the last 3 seasons. I mentioned that the 29-year-old Endo is kind of the centerpiece of this deal. He's making $3 million this upcoming year, and then he has 4 arbitration years after that. So although he's a little older than Colt Keith, he is a less expensive player for the next several seasons, which is positive for Detroit. I mentioned that Endo is a better defensive player, and he did actually hit more home runs than Keith. But fewer ribbies, a much lower batting average, much more strikeouts. He was a league average offensive player and put up a 1.1 WAR. I don't think there can be any dispute, even from those of you who are big fans of Mr. Endo and what he can do, that bringing on Colt Keith, who's 2 years younger, certainly will or should provide us better offense than what we got last year from Mr. Endo. The question really is whether it is worth the other significant pieces that we need to include. And I mentioned that, I did include a number of veterans and players with good personalities just to tick up 5% a pop to get them to take a little more of his contract. But outside of Endo, there's 4 key pieces that we will be sending. Samuel Zavala, I don't love giving him up. He's the guy that we claimed on waivers from the White Sox a year ago. And if you were wondering, the waiver wire a week ago, right when the offseason started, was very unimpressive this time around, and there was nobody that we ended up grabbing. But Zavala is a bat that we really liked. He had a 184 WRC plus in AA, 126 in AAA, and 153 in the small sample size that he had with Oakland this year. He is a solid defensive outfielder, decent speed, but I really don't think he's a 153 WRC plus guy when all is said and done. He's 24 years old. You look at his ratings, and against right-handed pitching, 50 contact, 50 gap power, 50 home run power, and a pretty good eye. I don't see him being an exceptional offensive player. I would have preferred not to include him in the deal because we kind of felt like we had our outfield set with Lara in center, Butler in right, the additions of DeLauder and Condon, and then promoting Zavala this year to be a full-time member of our team. So that's going to open up another spot in the outfield. But since it was not likely to be a starting spot for Zavala, and I don't think he's actually going to be as productive in the majors as he was this year, we were willing to include him. Interestingly, Joendry Vargas, the other guy that we picked up in waivers a year ago, also helped get this deal done. We've talked about him before. I think he is a good utility infielder, versatile glove, pretty solid defensively. I don't think he hits enough to be an everyday starter. Put up an 83 WRC plus in AA this year. I think he can certainly get better. He could be a starter if he works out and he develops every bit of potential we think he has. Realistically, that probably doesn't happen, and I think he's a good, solid utility infielder, but we were willing to include him to get the deal done. And then we also had to include minor league center fielder Juan Campos. Scouting discovery of ours from 2025. He had a pretty productive year in rookie ball this past year, putting up a 143 WRC plus. I think he can be a useful major league outfielder. He's got some speed, good outfield range. He's durable. The bat at the major league level is certainly the question. And you can see a year ago he started 60 games for us in rookie ball. This year he only started 15 games. He's not as high-end a prospect as some of the guys that we picked up in the IAFA period. So although he is a decent prospect and only 20 years old, we were willing to include him as well. And the rest of the guys to get the deal done are really just organizational depth, guys in their late 20s, early 30s. We're going to have to add in They wanted a lot of better prospects in our organization, including Cruz Schoolcraft to get the deal done. Kyle Bradish coming off leading the league in ERA. But Orlando Arcia, one final piece of organizational depth that we had, would get this deal done. So we're going to go ahead and do it. I think Keith is certainly better than Endo, although we're losing something defensively. We're spending more money, which isn't great, and we're giving up Zavala, who I think is a pretty solid outfield prospect. Vargas, who's a respectable infield prospect. And then Campos, who is a respectable outfield prospect. So it's not overwhelming to me what we're giving up, and that's why I think we have to do this deal. As I said, only getting them to retain 35% of his contract. It may just be a 2-year deal with us with Colt Keith, and when he gets up to those $13 and $15 million years, depending on what this team looks like, depending on whether our farm system has actually provided any major leaguers for us at that point, we may look to trade Colt Keith in the not-so-distant future. But we're bringing on an all-star, which helps with the owner goals. We're bringing on an extremely popular player, which should help with the owner goals and should help with our finances. I think we have to do this deal. As much as I have huge issues with Endo that are well documented at this point in previous videos, I'm a little bummed that we won't get to kind of run his career and see what he does next year. But as I said, he was a league average offensive player this year. He's going to be 30 shortly, even though he's better defensively than Mr. Keith. There's just no question at all that Keith is a better all-around player. So we are going to have a new third baseman. We are going to add Orlando Arcia into the deal. I'm going to get greedy and see if they'll go to 40%, but I know that they won't. So we are going to just get this deal done, complete the trade. The fans are ecstatic that we signed Colt Keith. We were 36 before. I want to see a bump here. And we actually did get a bump to 43, so that was significant. That in and of itself probably makes the trade worthwhile, even if we have to move on from him in a couple years when we'll be taking a bump the other direction when we lose him. But with Keith at third base, we're going to get more offense. With Ramirez at catcher against left-handed pitching, we're going to get more offense. And my thought is that the likes of DeLauder and Condon should more than replace what we got this past year from the likes of Ketel Marte and Brian Buelvis offensively. So I think we've definitely helped our offense this offseason already. And I think with the addition of Jackson Ferris, we've also made our pitching staff a little bit younger and a little bit better. We've definitely lost some depth in the bullpen. We've definitely lost some depth in terms of guys in their early to mid-20s that we expected to have roles on this team this year and into the future. And we've lost several prospects as well. But I don't feel like we've had to give up anybody that is irreplaceable. So I think we've made a few strides in hopefully finally getting this roster more competitive. So you can see this upcoming year, $3.2 million for Keith is a bargain, slightly more than what we would have been paying for Endo, but we'll take it. But he's going to be much more expensive than Endo going forward, even though I think he's still probably a bargain. The question is just when he gets into those out years, can we afford 8.4 and 9.8 million? You can see our salary obligations headed out to 2031 are going to be over $100 million. Clearly, there's a lot of arbitration eligible players that we'll be needing to move on from in the next couple of seasons. Going to have some real tough decisions to make, even with guys like DeLauder. He's going to be making 5 and 7.5. We talked about Ferris already. Condon, the numbers seem more reasonable at this point. We're getting near the end, likely, of our time with Brian Rincon. He's got one more minimum season, and then his numbers 6-7, 11-7, and 15-2 are extremely high. We're going to have to start winning. We're going to have to start generating more money, and we're going to have to start developing our farm system players more effectively than we have. But certainly the boost that we've just gotten in fan interest should help us a bit on the financial side for this upcoming season, which is at least one positive step in the right direction. And we have, in theory, you can see potentially some money to spend this upcoming offseason in free agency. It's not going to be enough to get the likes of Torkelson. It's not going to be enough to play at the high end of the starting pitchers. Honestly, in OOTP 25, it's not even going to be enough to play at the top end of relief pitchers. But we should be able to add a player or two that can help us. But I feel like we've made a little progress. At least the team is going to be different next year. We've moved on from some pretty significant players, but we've brought in some pretty significant players as well. If you've got thoughts on what we've done so far, would love to hear them in the comments. And we're going to continue on with this off season and continue approaching the beginning of free agency in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.